The Arctic Circle is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. And even though it's at the top of our planet, we don't know much about it because few people ever get there. But if you are watching this video, then you are closer to the Arctic than 95% of all other people. So you might be wondering, just how close are you to the Arctic Circle? Well, that's what we're gonna be talking about today. Because in this video, I am going to tell you 3 things that you didn't know about the Arctic Circle. Now, these are just some basic facts that everyone should know about the Arctic Circle. So stay tuned until the end so you don't miss anything. And while you're doing that, please remember to subscribe. Doing that will ensure that you get notified whenever we upload a new video. And also, that's the best way that you can support us. With that being said, let's begin with number 1. The Arctic Circle isn't actually fixed. In other words, it moves around a little bit. Did you know that the Arctic Circle doesn't actually stay still? No, it shifts a little bit each year. That's because Earth's rotational axis wobbles a little bit. This wobble causes the North Pole to move around by about 11 kilometers or about 7 miles every year. However, it does eventually return back to its original position every 400 years. This means that the Arctic Circle also returns to its original position every 400 years. That's something you don't learn very often, but now we're gonna move on to know, too. But before we do that, now is a good time more than ever to mention that if you want to help us reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers, then you could do that by clicking that button right now. It really helps us out, so thank you guys so much for doing that. Now let's move on to know, too. The Arctic Circle spans 8 different countries. If you thought only one country was part of the Arctic Circle, then you were wrong. That's because 8 different countries fall within the Arctic Circle. Those countries are Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, the US state of Alaska, Canada, Denmark, which includes the territory of Greenland, and finally, Iceland. Out of all of these countries, the largest country that falls under the Arctic Circle is Russia, which has about 4.4 million square kilometers, or about 1.7 million square miles within the circle. On the other hand, the smallest country that lies within the Arctic Circle is Iceland. Only a tiny part of Iceland actually lies in the Arctic Circle. But nevertheless, they are considered to be part of it. Now, we're going to move on to the last fact of the video. But before we do that, I want to mention that your support really helps us a lot. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. With that being said, let's move on to number 3. Within the Arctic Circle, you can experience the midnight sun and the polar night. Imagine seeing the sun for 24 hours straight without it ever setting. Well, that's exactly what happens in the Arctic Circle. During summer, the sun never sets in the Arctic Circle. It stays in the sky for 24 hours. However, during winter, the opposite happens. The sun doesn't rise for 24 hours. This phenomenon is known as the midnight sun and the polar night, respectively. The midnight sun occurs when the sun shines all day, and the polar night occurs when it is dark all day. Both of these phenomena only happen in the Arctic Circle. They do not happen anywhere else on Earth. On top of that, the duration of these days is constantly increasing. That's because Earth's axis is slowly tilting. This tilt causes the sun to shine in the Arctic Circle for more hours every year. For example, in 1990, the sun shone for 20 hours every day in December. But in 2015, the sun shone for 22 hours in the same month. Scientists predict that in 2030, the sun will shine for at least 24 hours straight in the Arctic Circle during December. What a sight that would be! You might be thinking, what would it be like to live in an area where the sun shines for half a year straight? Well, it's actually quite difficult to live in such conditions. Even though it sounds like a dream come true, it can cause serious health issues. When you don't see any darkness, your body stops producing melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that is produced in the absence of light. It helps you fall asleep faster. Without it, sleeping becomes very difficult. Moreover, all your biological functions start to get messed up. That's why scientists are very careful about the amount of sunlight humans are exposed to. So what about the other extreme? What happens when the sun doesn't rise for 24 hours? Well, in this case, your body starts to think that it's in a perpetual winter. This means that your body starts storing a lot of fat. Why? Well, this is because your body thinks that food needs to be stored as fat since there is no sunlight and food won't be available anytime soon. On top of that, the temperature is very low, so your body thinks it needs to conserve energy. As a result, you start gaining weight rapidly. Now, you might be thinking, how can I avoid these problems if I live in the Arctic Circle? Well, luckily for you, there are ways to prevent these problems from happening. For example, scientists recommend exposing yourself to light for only 2 hours. That's all you need to prevent these health issues. If you expose yourself to too much light, you'll start losing melatonin. So you must be careful about that as well. In addition to this, living in the Arctic Circle is not easy. For example, you need to protect yourself from frostbite and hypothermia. Frostbite is a condition that occurs when your skin freezes. On the other hand, hypothermia occurs when your body loses the ability to regulate its temperature. Both of these conditions can be life-threatening. That's why people who live in the Arctic Circle need to take special precautions. They need to wear warm clothes and also stay indoors when the temperatures drop. Speaking of temperatures, the lowest temperature that has ever been recorded in the Arctic Circle is -66 degrees Celsius. That's almost -90 degrees Fahrenheit. Just imagine being outside in those conditions. You would probably freeze in a matter of seconds. The highest temperature that has ever been recorded in the Arctic Circle is 21.2 degrees Celsius. That's about 70.2 degrees Fahrenheit. As far as precipitation is concerned, the Arctic Circle receives very little rainfall. In fact, it's drier than most deserts on Earth. On average, the Arctic Circle receives only 25 millimeters of rain every year. However, it does snow quite a lot. On average, it snows about 46 centimeters every year. Now, you might be wondering, what happens to the water after it snows? Does it melt? Well, no, it doesn't. In fact, the snow stays frozen for many years. That's because the Arctic Circle is covered in a layer of ice. This ice sheet is about 2.5 kilometers thick, which is about 1.6 miles. Beneath this ice sheet, the temperature is always below freezing point. That's why the snow never melts. Another interesting fact about the Arctic Circle is that it's home to many animals, including polar bears, seals, walruses, and many species of birds. These animals have adapted to the harsh conditions of the Arctic Circle and are perfectly suited for survival there. Polar bears, for example, have thick fur coats that keep them warm in the freezing temperatures. Seals and walruses, on the other hand, have blubber that protects them from the cold. Blubber is a thick layer of fat that acts as an insulator. Birds, on the other hand, have feathers that keep them warm. Overall, the Arctic Circle is a truly amazing place. From the midnight sun to the polar night, there's a lot to marvel at here. Just make sure to be careful if you ever visit. After all, it's one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Thank you for watching. See you next time.